How's it going, sir?
Oh, very well, thank you.
Yeah.
How's your cat? I saw that you just tried to put the cat out,
Oh, I
but
did.
it wouldn't go out.
Oh, it went out. It went out.
It went out. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a success story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a win. You got to have little wins in life in order to sort of get a momentum going, and I feel like I'm getting there. I think
It's the
that's
start.
it's a
It's the
start for
start of a
me.
good afternoon, I'd
Yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. Well, it's afternoon for us, so just sort of to let everybody know who you are, and where you are. We're in a similar time zone. I'm in New York. You are in Colombia at the moment, right? I
That's
don't.
right.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying that correctly though, but that's where
Colombia.
you are. Colombia. Yeah. Uh, so maybe you could just say who you are, a little bit about your background, so that people watching uh, don't think, "Who's this guy? Why should I listen to him?" I think
Well,
people should listen to you.
I think even if I introduce myself, people will probably still think, why should I listen to him? But we'll try anyway. Hello everyone. My name's Francis. I'm from the UK. I currently am in Colombia, but I've lived in China for the last 10 years. No, sorry, 9 years, not quite 10 years yet. And that's where I met Luke for the first time in a city called Dalian in the north of China. And for most of that time, I've been working on things related to English study and particularly IELTS. So a few years ago, I became a qualified IELTS examiner. So I used to do the speaking test for IELTS. So when people came to get their IELTS score and do their test, it was me sitting on the
You're
other side of the desk.
the grim man. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. My beard wasn't so big at that time, but I still had some beard and could do a pretty sort of angry face.
Yeah.
So most of the students left crying. That was my experience.
Okay, so actually that leads perfectly into my first question, right? On one side, what do they tell you as an examiner? We want you to be this way with students, for example. Do they say, just be yourself, or do they say we want you to be glum and serious, more facial hair, more serious? And then the second sort of tag onto that is, generally, what's it like to be an IELTS examiner, and is there anything that we can sort of glean from your experience as students of English who want to maybe take the IELTS? And I'm encouraging everyone to take IELTS. I say it all the time because I think it's a good exam. It's better than TOEFL.
Yeah,
It's fairly accurate in terms of getting a good sense of where you are, and it gives you some pressure, even if you're not prepping for university. If you just sign up for one and you have that coming up in 2 months, you're going to give yourself a little pressure, which is good.
exactly. Yeah. And that's true for me. I'm studying here in Colombia. I'm studying Spanish, and so I'm signing up for the DELE, which is like the Spanish equivalent of IELTS. And you're absolutely right. It does give you like the pressure, and there's a big difference between generally studying English and studying English when you have a deadline like an exam. So yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion.
That's a
But
sort of trigger on human nature, right? That triggers
exactly,
on. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Fear, I think, is what it is.
It's the fear
Um,
response. Yep.
um, so your question is like, what is it like to be an examiner?
Yep.
Um, I think the biggest thing that I remember is that it's a little bit boring. To be honest, it's quite boring. And why is that? It's boring because when you're an examiner, the way that it works, most exams happen at the weekend, or in China, sometimes they happen on a Wednesday. But all of the exams are kind of put into the same day. So if I'm an examiner and I'm waking up, say, on a Saturday morning, I've traveled to another city. I wake up, I go for 8 o'clock, have the first student, 15 minutes with that student. I ask them some questions, they answer, I make some notes, and then we're finished. 5 minutes later, the next student comes in. 15 minutes, okay, another 5 minutes, and so on and so on and so on. And it goes for the whole day. And the big problem is that a lot of students particularly in China, but I'm sure in other parts of the world as well, say the same things. They give
Yeah.
the same answers. So as an examiner, you're really looking for people who can make you interested, people who you want to have a conversation with.
Mm.
If a student comes in and tells me something interesting about themselves, one of their hobbies, or an interesting story that happened to them, it doesn't even have to be true, but
You don't care.
exactly, I don't care. But it's more interesting for me, and I'm more likely to, give you a higher score just because I think you're using English in an interesting way. So my big advice that I always tell my students is try to show your personality. Don't just, speak in a monotone. Don't recite answers that you found on the internet because other people are doing exactly the same. Make the examiner interested in you as a person, is what I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting advice, because it goes against what people are kind of used to. When they think about exams, they think of, okay, I just need to get it right, and once I get it right, then I'm done. But you're sort of saying, you got to remember that you're talking to a human being
Exactly.
who has a tummy ache, who is groggy, who's hungover,
Who needs a coffee?
who needs another coffee, right? So if you keep that in mind, then it might help with the personal connection, right? And I want to be clear that when you say be interesting, that doesn't mean just sort of shout lobsters out of nowhere. It means, within the context of sort of the conversation and making it flow, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way that the speaking test works is that the examiner is going to ask you at first a few kind of restrictive questions, and then you have part two, which is the long term, where you basically you make a speech or a presentation.
Right.
And then part three is almost like a conversation. The examiner will be asking you about a particular topic, but you have the chance to talk a little bit longer, and then the examiner is going to ask you more questions based on what you said. So there's plenty of opportunity there to be able to give interesting answers, tell the examiner something that he doesn't know, things like that. And yeah, it's making a human connection. Imagine that you're having a real conversation with someone, because you are.
Right. And the person you're talking with also wants to. That's what they want, because
Exactly.
they're in hell. Yeah.
It's not quite hell, but it's
Purgatory.
maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so for those three questions, maybe we can get into that a little bit. The three. So we're just talking about, if anyone is not familiar with the IELTS, we have four big sections or parts here. We have the speaking part, the reading part, the writing part, and the listening part, right? Then within the speaking part, which is really what we're talking about and what most people want to get ready for for example, with a teacher like you or I, there are three questions, right? Three sections, right?
Three parts, yeah.
Three parts. Parts, section, the same thing. Okay. Whatever. Yeah.
But you've already used sections, so
right.
you have to use variety in your language.
Lobster.
Lobster, high score.
Yeah, give me an 8. So so the three parts then, I want to know, are they equally important? Do you say, okay, now I'm listening as an examiner to part 3. That's what I'm really listening to. Or, I'm really focused on part 2. Or, part 1 we just get out of the way. Or is it the whole thing?
It's the whole thing, really, but in different ways. So as an examiner, the training that you're given is that you gradually, over the 15 minutes, you gradually focus in on what that person's final score is going to be. So what does that mean? That means that in the first part, you're going to get a general idea of what that person's score will be. So the IELTS score, by the way, is for the speaking is out of 9. So you and I, Luke, would hopefully get a 9 for our speaking. At least an 8, I'd say.
Lobster.
Well, good knowledge of animals, of sea animals. So that would certainly get you a higher score. But anyway, so level 9 is the highest, and so it goes down to level 0 if you don't say anything. If you go in there and sit quietly for 15 minutes. But most people come between about level 4 and about level 8. And so in the first part, the examiner is going to be deciding, all right, this person is about a 5 or a 6, maybe they're a 7 or an 8, getting a general idea. And then in part 2, which is that long 2-minute speech, the examiner's listening for each separate part, each separate skill of your English speaking. So those 4 skills are grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and pronunciation. So kind of for 30 seconds each, the examiner is going to be focusing on how good is your grammar, any grammar mistakes, how good is your vocabulary, are you using lots of different words or the same word over and over again?
Right.
And are you speaking fluently? And are there any words that you're not pronouncing correctly? Is it easy to understand your English? So that's part 2. And so we kind of focus a bit more. And then part 3, you're confirming what you thought about in part 1 and part 2. So you're confirming, okay, this student is going to be a 6 for grammar, a 6 for vocabulary, but a 7 for fluency and pronunciation, something like that.
Now, how do you evaluate someone? Let's say I go into the exam thinking, oh, so I can just bring up my vocabulary score, right? So I learn a lot of advanced words, and I sort of, as I'm speaking, cram them into what I'm saying, right? Right. Walking in the park and I saw a voluptuous apple tree, right? And maybe it doesn't quite. How do you sort of evaluate, okay, that's an advanced word, but it's used in an awkward way. That's not really how we use that word. We don't talk about trees that way. You could, I guess, but how do you evaluate that? Is that just a gut feeling thing? Are you told, look for it in this way? How specific is it?
No, that comes under one of the 4 skills. So as I mentioned, there's grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation, and the 4th one is actually fluency and coherence. We usually just say fluency, but it's actually fluency and coherence. And coherence means kind of, are you answering the question that the examiner has asked you? And also, are you does your answer make sense?
Yeah.
Or are you just throwing these words in from anywhere and they're not related to what you're talking about? So yeah, if you started talking about a voluptuous apple tree, as an examiner, I would take that apple tree and I'd think voluptuous, that doesn't really make sense. So I'd kind of, you'd either lose marks for that or certainly you wouldn't get more marks.
Right. Okay, so there is there's some flexibility to it in how you evaluate that, right? That's what makes it very conversational, which is interesting. So when you're listening to people, this is sort of a tag-on question before we talk about a prep. I want to ask you a question about prep because I think a lot of people will be curious about that. And guys, if you have questions, leave your questions in the comments for Francis, and Francis may or may not answer them. Who knows?
I'll consider it.
Yeah, he'll think about it. So if you have in your day an extremely advanced person come in and they get an 8, and the next person comes in, and if they'd have been the first person in the day, and you'd have given them a 6.5, but because you just had an 8, you now give them a 5 because they seem way lower. Does that happen? That sort of psychological, that sort of bias one way or the other, where you are, the window is pushed this way or that way because you had an extreme case?
I think that may happen with very new examiners. But what you have to remember about, like I said before, about examiners who have done it for a little while, they have had hundreds, thousands of students who have come in. So even if someone comes in who does have amazing English, who's a native speaker or almost a native speaker, still that's not going to completely like throw all of the examiner's experience out of the window. So I'd say maybe, you know, in as an examiner in my first day of examining, my first day ever, possibly that could happen. But also, the IELTS exam is designed to stop that because you have something called the band descriptors. And what that is a list for each of those four skills, vocabulary, grammar, etc., etc. And for each of them, you have details about, let's say for grammar, what is level 7 grammar, okay? Or what is level 6 grammar? What is the difference between level 6 and level 7? So if the examiner's remembering their training and they're doing a good job of judging your score and they're looking at the band descriptors, then that kind of thing shouldn't happen. I can't say that it's never happened, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
But it shouldn't happen.
That makes sense. Okay, so I think probably what a lot of people watching this will be very curious about is, all right, maybe I will take the IELTS, maybe I will sign up for it. How should I get ready? What should I do to prepare and practice for it? So knowing what you know, bringing all of your expert knowledge on this topic to bear on the question, how would you recommend give us obviously the free version. If you want the full version, then take Francis's IELTS course, obviously. give us the Coke Zero of what people should do to prepare for IELTS.
Well, it depends really, because I think as we've mentioned, there are the 4 different sections of the IELTS test. So of course your preparation for the listening part and the reading part are going to be quite different from your preparation for the speaking part, for example. So taking each part one at a time, I would say for listening and for reading, there are lots of practice tests that you can buy. And honestly, that really is the best way to, let's say you have 3 months before the test, doing a lot of listening tests and reading tests is a good way to get yourself ready. If you have more time, then I would recommend doing things like, I guess, the classic suggestions: listen to the radio, listen to Voice of America, listen to the BBC to practice your listening, read newspapers, read newspaper articles. And then for the writing, I think you can actually combine practicing reading and writing in the same activity. And this is something that I always recommend to my students, which is that once a day, you read a newspaper article in English, and ideally from like a good newspaper, something like, I don't know, the New York Times or the Guardian or something like that. You read that article and you find any words that you don't know, you write those words down, and then you write a 100 or maybe 200 word summary of that article in your own words, using some of those words that you've picked out. And if you do that every day, even if you don't have a teacher to correct things, it's a really good way of improving your vocabulary, improving your reading skills, and improving your writing skills as well. So that's something that I think works very well. And it can work well, say, if you have 3 months left to prepare, or if you have a year to prepare. If you have 3 days to prepare, I'm not sure it would be quite as effective.
Or if you're just trying to improve your English in general. I mean, that
Indeed.
I think one thing that people don't do enough is spend time on that kind of thing, right? A lot of people spend time just specifically learning words, right? lists and things like that. But if you're learning all of these words in context, and I recommend that people use an English dictionary with good example sentences so that they can sort of see the usage, then even if you're not preparing for IELTS, being able to read, process, and write and use some of those words that's what you and I did in school, right? That's how we became what's the adjective?
Mediocre users of English.
Mediocre users of English, exactly. Voluptuous mediocre users of English.
Exponential users of English.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. That's really great advice. Should people get a private teacher?
I think that for the speaking, it's definitely helpful.
Yeah.
You can prepare without a teacher for the speaking test, but it's never going to be as effective because speaking is the area where it's hardest to find what your mistakes are, to realize if you're making mistakes. Writing, you can use tools like Grammarly.com, which kind of correct your writing and give you suggestions as you're writing. So that's a very useful thing. But the same technology doesn't really exist for speaking, I don't think. So I think for speaking, it's definitely a good idea to get a teacher.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you're serious, it's not that you need to take 1,000 classes with a teacher, but you need to know a teacher can identify things that you're just not aware of and do it in a relatively short period of time. Even if you take, 20 classes with a teacher or 16 classes with a teacher, you're at least getting some pointers and directions that can at least get you going in the right path, right? If you use that resource. Although I wonder if Google Assistant and AI will get there eventually and replace teachers.
I'm sure they will.
It'll happen. It's going to happen. All right. Well, Francis, I think those are some great tips. I hope people take those tips and run with them. Again, I would encourage everyone to think about signing up for IELTS because that's a good way to see where you are, and it's a good way to give yourself that good pressure of I have a thing coming up. Crap, I need to improve. That's a sort of, we call it a hack. It hacks your laziness and it forces you to get ready for something. Unless you're a super lazy and you're even able to be lazy as you get ready for IELTS, which is impressive. That deserves.
That's a high level of laziness. That's like level 9 laziness.
Voluptuous laziness. Well, Francis, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you've got going on. I know you've got a course. I know you've got a new YouTube channel. Do you want to talk a little bit about that so people know where to find you and how to get your stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as far as I'm aware, the links are down here for our YouTube, our Udemy course, and also our Instagram. And yeah, basically in YouTube, we've got videos coming out about once a week. Which are all they're fun videos, but they have a serious message as well about preparing for the IELTS test and some tips and things that you need to know before you take the test. And then also our Udemy course is an IELTS speaking course. So it's for people who really don't have access to a teacher or only have maybe the time for a few hours with a teacher. And what it does is explain a lot of things that stop students from getting higher scores. So, if you want to get a 7 or an 8 for your IELTS speaking, but you found that you've got a 5 or maybe a 4, it explains things like that. And it's divided into those 4 areas: grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and pronunciation. And so there's lots of common mistakes that people make, and I explain those, and also some new vocabulary to give you a wider vocabulary, and a lot of other things as well. So yeah, I think it's worth checking out.
It's a new course, right?
It is new, yeah. We released it about 3 weeks ago.
Cool. Yeah, guys, so check out Francis's course if you're interested in IELTS. It's definitely worth picking up. Francis knows what he's talking about. And the YouTube channel as well. I've seen a couple of the videos on the channel. It's a new channel, but
Yeah.
very, very insightful. One of those is the 5 tips, right?
That's the 5 tips. Yeah.
That's an awesome video. An awesome video. Well, Francis, thank you so much. Guys, check out Francis's stuff. Again, Francis, thanks for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do another soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Luke. It was great to speak to you. And yeah, I hope everybody found it at least a little bit useful.
Well, let's hope so.